we're now on the verge of collapse and slavery. And I think to people who don't pay attention to this stuff, that probably sounds a little bit inflammatory, maybe a little bit overblown. But when you see the economic situation that we're in, when you see the debt, and the Treasury just acknowledged recently 150 trillion in unfunded liabilities, they have hollowed out the middle class. They have removed our ability to even produce wealth. They've shipped it all to communist China under the guise of saving the climate and other such nonsense. And it all has its roots in the usurious, unjust system of money that is owned and operated.
You're watching Silver News Daily. Subscribe for more.
The Federal Reserve has pulled off the greatest financial illusion in history. $150 trillion in promises that can never be paid, and almost no one is talking about it. Social Security, Medicare, pensions, they've turned into ticking time bombs, hollowing out the middle class and setting the stage for a collapse unlike anything we've ever seen. This isn't just some accounting error. It's a deliberate system of financial slavery, one that's been running in the background for decades, siphoning wealth from the hands of everyday people into the coffers of the elite. But here's the part that should send chills down your spine. As the dollar crumbles under the weight of this mountain of fake money, one asset is quietly preparing for the moment of detonation: silver. With the petrodollar crumbling, inflation raging, and a digital control grid forming, we are on the verge of a reset. And when that reset hits, silver won't just rise. It could erupt past $1,000 as the world scrambles for real money in a system built on lies.
Well, thanks, Dunnigan. And I think we're dealing here with competing forces within the Trump administration. And I don't know who's going to win. In fact, right now, I don't really have any access to inside information, so I couldn't tell you kind of what's going on behind the scenes. But I do know that Trump has a much better understanding of the Federal Reserve problem than he lets on. And he's hinted at this quite a few times before in the past. He's talked about the desirability of a gold-backed dollar. He's talked about the horror of what they have done to our money. He's talked about the benefits of using gold in trade. In fact, he's publicly done it. He allowed a company to lease office space in one of his buildings by paying in with a big, nice gold bar. So he has some very serious knowledge of the downsides of this system. And I believe some of his actions speak to that. You've had on your program, Judy Sheldon, right? When he nominated her for the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, I said, well, that's a good sign. We got somebody who understands this, somebody who wants to move us in the right direction. But at the same time, there's also a very powerful faction within the administration at the highest levels, and I could name some of the names, who want to move us toward a new financial system that would be much more conducive to global slavery. We are, I think, coming up almost inevitably on a new system. And what that's going to look like, I think, is up in the air. Yes, the petrodollar system is very rapidly coming to an end. I mean, just look at how much oil Saudi Arabia is now selling in currencies other than the dollar, and it'll tell you pretty much everything you need to know about where this is headed. After the last link to gold was severed in 1971, the fact that oil could pretty much only be bought and sold in international markets in dollars was what kept the dollar propped up. And of course, the outrageous strength of the U.S. military. We're moving past that now. The U.S. military, at least until the last year, was something of a joke. All over the world, people were seeing pictures of our senior officers wearing dog masks and running around in tutus. I mean, it became really a laughing stock. And the fact that the dollar is now not necessary anymore to buy oil in global markets really makes it less appealing. And then you see what they did to, for example, the Russian government. And I'm no friend of the Russian government, by the way, but the Russian government saw these sanctions. They saw what the U.S. government did with the power that it still has. They said, who would want that, right? Why are we going to make ourselves vulnerable to the whims of some clown politicians in Washington? We're going to move to a new system. So we're moving to a new system. And the question is, what will it look like? I think over the long term, the globalist, insider, deep stater, establishment types, whatever you want to call them, they want to see a global central bank digital currency. They've been laying the foundation for that for a very long time. They want the IMF to eventually become the issuer of the international reserve currency asset, whatever they end up calling it. Right now, the proto-global reserve currency already exists. It's called special drawing rights. And the Chinese and the Russians now have a pretty big say in that, not as big as the United States yet, but that may change. And there are people within the Trump administration who I think sympathize very much with that vision. If you look at, for example, what the Commerce Secretary is doing and what he's involved in with these stable coins. I mean, for me, this is just another scam piled on top of another scam. It's a new system for looting our value, for looting the fruit of our labor. And I think it's very dangerous. And it's a CBDC in all but name, right? Now they passed the Stable Act and the Genius Act. They're working on the Clarity Act. This is just basically a way of nationalizing private cryptocurrencies, if you will, to kind of turn them into the same thing that a CBDC would have been otherwise. Something that's trackable, something that's programmable, something that can be shut off, something where every single transaction can be tracked, monitored, controlled. You see what the Bank for International Settlements is building with the International Blockchain Ledger, where they hope to eventually, and they're doing this openly, by the way. None of this is like secret information that I have. You can just go to the BIS website and see it. But they're building the architecture here for this International Blockchain Ledger where
Imagine owing more money than all the world's assets combined. Now imagine pretending that's sustainable. That's exactly what's happening with America's unfunded liabilities, now estimated at a staggering $150 trillion. This isn't national debt you hear about on the news. It's the silent killer, hidden in the fine print of Social Security, Medicare, pensions, and other promises the government has no way of keeping. And when you factor in a sure $36 trillion national debt on top of that, the picture becomes even more horrifying. These liabilities aren't just numbers. They represent a system that's guaranteed to implode because the tax base can't support it and the money doesn't exist. The middle class is being drained to pay interest on debt that's spiraling out of control, and wealth creation is being strangled by this monstrous fiscal burden. Economists are already projecting a debt-to-GDP ratio of 236% by 2050, meaning the economy will collapse under its own weight long before then. And what happens when faith in that system vanishes? People run to the exits. They run to gold. But more and more, they're running to silver, because it's not just a hedge, it's a lifeline. And as confidence in these broken promises disintegrates, silver demand is accelerating. This isn't a warning. It's already happening.
No question about it. And you can see this even in the way that the Federal Reserve has evolved over the years, right? Back in 1913, when the Federal Reserve Act was passed into law, it was, relatively speaking, a benign institution. I won't say it was benign. In fact, it was very malevolent. But compared with the atrocity we have today with the same name, it is orders of magnitude worse today than it was back then. Back then, the dollar was still, at least on paper, by law, tied to gold. So the Federal Reserve couldn't just wake up and print trillions of dollars and bankrupt the country. At least on paper, they were required to pay attention to the amount of gold reserves that existed. And of course, they were required to exchange your paper notes for actual money. First, they said, gold or silver. Later, they said lawful money, which of course meant gold or silver. But the point is there. The Federal Reserve has evolved to become worse and worse and worse. And I believe alongside the public school system, the public education system, it has been one of the most insidious forces in fundamentally transforming America away from its foundations in individual liberty, personal responsibility, private property that produced the most prosperity we've ever seen in the recorded history of mankind. We're now on the verge of, I would say, collapse and slavery. And I think to people who don't pay attention to this stuff, that probably sounds a little bit inflammatory, maybe a little bit overblown. Unfortunately, I think those are the correct terms to use to describe the situation we find ourselves in. It may not look like it yet to an average person who's just, sitting there doom scrolling on their iPhone. But when you see the economic situation that we're in, when you see the debt, and the Treasury just acknowledged recently $150 trillion in unfunded liabilities, they have hollowed out the middle class. They have removed our ability to even produce wealth. They've shipped it all to communist China under the guise of saving the climate and other such nonsense. And it all has its roots in the usurious, unjust system of money that is owned and operated by the Federal Reserve.
Imagine owing more money than all the world's assets combined. Now imagine pretending that's sustainable. That's exactly what's happening with America's unfunded liabilities, now estimated at a staggering $150 trillion. This isn't national debt you hear about on the news. It's the silent killer, hidden in the fine print of Social Security, Medicare, pensions, and other promises the government has no way of keeping. And when you factor in a sure $36 trillion national debt on top of that, the picture becomes even more horrifying. These liabilities aren't just numbers. They represent a system that's guaranteed to implode because the tax base can't support it and the money doesn't exist. The middle class is being drained to pay interest on debt that's spiraling out of control, and wealth creation is being strangled by this monstrous fiscal burden. Economists are already projecting a debt-to-GDP ratio of 236% by 2050, meaning the economy will collapse under its own weight long before then. And what happens when faith in that system vanishes? People run to the exits. They run to gold. But more and more, they're running to silver, because it's not just a hedge, it's a lifeline. And as confidence in these broken promises disintegrates, silver demand is accelerating. This isn't a warning. It's already happening.
Yeah, again, this could almost be a comedy show. That is utterly and totally false. The Bible is very clear. Dishonest weights and measures, the Bible says, are an abomination to the Lord. That's in like the same category as like sacrificing your children to demons. God obviously takes this pretty seriously. And this is absolutely, it's almost the epitome of unequal weights and measures because they're inflating away the currency. And then there's another element, too. God repeatedly condemns usury. And I think some people have misinterpreted the term usury. They assume that it just means any interest rate or any fee paid on money. I don't think that's a good understanding of the term usury. If you're going to forsake the ability to use your money now, it's only fair, I think, that you'd be able to collect a small fee because there's, of course, the time preference associated with money. This is just basic economic stuff. But what the Federal Reserve does is, again, the epitome of usury. They're creating currency out of thin air. They're loaning it out. They're charging interest on it that they've never created, which therefore can never be fully repaid unless they create more money. So it's a scam piled on top of a scam piled on top of a scam that is bleeding the middle class dry, that is pumping the wealth of Americans to the pockets of the uber elites, not the 1%, like the 0.0001%. Forget the 1%, right? Their dessert, in the famous words of David Webb. But that's what we're dealing with here. It is a wicked institution in the most real sense, no matter which legitimate ethical framework you use, but certainly the biblical one, without question.
For decades, the petrodollar was the glue holding America's global dominance together. But now, that glue is coming undone. When the U.S. cut its final ties to gold in 1971, it replaced real money with oil-backed currency, forcing nations to buy dollars to purchase energy. That deal gave the dollar artificial strength and gave America the power to print wealth on demand. But fast forward to 2025, and Saudi Arabia is selling oil in non-dollar currencies, openly trading with China in yuan, and shaking hands with BRICS nations pushing for dollar alternatives. The 50-year petrodollar agreement has quietly expired, and the fallout is seismic. Global oil transactions in dollars have dropped to 80% and falling, a figure that once stood near 100%. This shift is more than symbolic. It means the world no longer needs as many dollars. And when demand for dollars fades, so does its value. And as the dollar weakens, silver strengthens. Investors are beginning to treat silver not just as a commodity, but as an escape hatch from the crumbling fiat order. They're watching the world move away from the dollar and toward tangible assets. And they know that when the reserve currency goes down, the rush into hard money will be violent, sudden, and unstoppable.
The Federal Reserve is an institution that has been lying from the beginning and continues to lie to this day. And the fake CPI numbers are the most perfect example. I mean, they are constantly finding ways to manipulate the data. And when it gets to the point where they can't manipulate it anymore, and it's so bad everybody's going to figure out what's going on, they just stop publishing them. When I was in college, this would have been, I guess, 2008. I was taking a lot of economics courses, and I confronted my economics professor. We were talking about M3, which was basically the broadest measure of how much currency is in circulation. And I told him that the Federal Reserve had stopped publishing the M3. He's like, that's impossible. They would never do that. Sure enough, it would. Not only was it possible, it had actually happened. And because what it showed was the Federal Reserve was creating all kinds of new currency. So they lie about everything. They lie about the inflation rates. They lie about everything you can think of. And so I guess with that, they have a lot in common with the U.S. government.
Just before we get going, we just launched the official Silver News Daily Telegram. To kick things off, we're running a 10-ounce silver giveaway. Yes, real physical silver, not a voucher, not digital credits, actual bullion. This Telegram will be our new home for real-time silver discussions, market insights, collection picks, and everything precious metals. It's where the community truly comes alive. Here's how to enter the 10-ounce silver giveaway. Be subscribed to Silver News Daily on YouTube. Turn on the notification bell. Comment 10-ounce giveaway on 3 separate videos. Be an active member of the Telegram group and say hi. Once we hit 500 active Telegram members, we'll pick one lucky winner to receive 10 ounces of silver shipped directly to you. So get in early, stay active. The death of the petrodollar is only part of the story. What's rising in its place is something far more dystopian. Central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, are being sold to the public as modern monetary innovation. But in reality, they're the foundation of a global surveillance grid. Programmable money tied to your identity, your behavior, your social score. Every transaction tracked, every asset monitored, every dissent punished. The Fed is already researching its version, but in January 2025, Trump signed an executive order halting its rollout temporarily. Yet even with that roadblock, the groundwork is already being laid. Over 20 U.S. states are pushing forward with sound money laws, trying to insulate themselves from a centralized digital future. But globally, the march toward CBDCs continues. 3 countries have already launched them, and the pressure for the U.S. to follow grows by the day. This isn't about convenience, it's about control. Once cash is gone and CBDCs are in place, opting out becomes impossible. That's why silver isn't just a store of value anymore. It's a tool of resistance. Physical, untraceable, and outside the reach of digital tyranny, silver is becoming the asset of choice for those preparing for what's next. And as the walls of the financial prison are being built in plain sight, people are quietly stacking their escape.
It is absolutely not. Now, there's a nexus with the U.S. government in that it was created by an act of Congress, in that the president is given a list every once in a while of people that the bankers like that he can choose for some of the open slots on the board of governors there. But no, really, the Federal Reserve is a collection of privately owned banks, and they are owned by banks. And so I actually discovered this in college. I mentioned it in that recent radio interview that you mentioned. I was astounded because I expected when I called the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta that they're going to be like, what kind of kooky conspiracy theorists are you? Of course we're a federal agency. Like, don't be silly. But no, they told me that it is actually a privately owned bank. It's owned by its member banks. They own shares. They pay dividends to those shareholders. Those shareholders are then able to make decisions about how the bank will be governed, including, by the way, appointing its officers. So it is a system of privately owned banks that has a nexus with the federal government. But the good news is it could be dissolved with an act of Congress, just like it was created by an act of Congress. But it is not a government agency, it's not federal, and it does not have actual reserves.
True. While the federal system pushes for more control, the states are quietly rebelling, and their weapon of choice is precious metals. In 2025, a record-breaking 23 U.S. states have now passed laws recognizing gold and silver as legal tender. This isn't symbolic. This is a direct rejection of the fiat system and the looming threat of CBDCs. By eliminating sales taxes and allowing silver to function as currency, these states are creating parallel financial systems that can survive the collapse of the dollar. Florida is conducting state-funded studies on reintroducing gold and silver as active mediums of exchange. South Carolina is advancing similar legislation. This grassroots movement is spreading like wildfire, fueled by a growing awareness that Washington can't fix the debt, can't stop the inflation, and can't be trusted to preserve economic freedom. The public is catching on, slowly but surely, that the Fed's monopoly on money isn't just broken, it's dangerous. And silver is at the heart of the resistance. It's liquid, portable, and increasingly accepted as money once again. As more states turn towards sound money, silver's role transforms from an overlooked investment into a foundational element of financial sovereignty. And in this fight between centralization and freedom, silver is becoming the standard bearer.
And regulate the value thereof. You will not find any power to give a private cartel of banks a total monopoly on creation of currency and credit, much less the setting of interest rates, the most important price in the economy. And you will find also a prohibition on states. This is in Article 1, Section 10, making anything other than gold or silver a tender in payment of debts. So you have states flagrantly violating the Constitution. You have Congress pretty flagrantly violating the Constitution. But in fairness to Congress, this debate's been going on for a while. Going back to the founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton was a big advocate of a central bank, not the disgusting monster that we have today with the Federal Reserve. He did propose a central bank, and he succeeded actually with the first Bank of the United States. But to compare those two as like apples and oranges, I would have agreed with Thomas Jefferson. It was unconstitutional. They shouldn't have done it. But the first Bank of the United States was like a cold compared to the Federal Reserve today is like a stage 4 cancer about to kill you. So,
but it's not just the monetary revolution that's driving silver. It's a technological one too. Silver is the bloodstream of green innovation, and right now, demand is exploding at a pace the market can't handle. In 2025 alone, the solar industry is expected to consume 200 million ounces of silver, a staggering 20% increase from last year. Why? Because silver isn't just a good conductor, it's the best. And when it comes to high-efficiency solar panels, there is no substitute. But here's where things get even more intense. China controls 80% of the world's solar photovoltaic supply chain. So while America tries to decarbonize, it's simultaneously becoming dependent on a foreign adversary for the very metals and tech needed to pull it off. Meanwhile, EVs are guzzling 25 to 50 grams of silver each, and as electric vehicle production ramps up, so does the pressure on global silver supplies. Add in new tariffs, supply chain disruptions, and geopolitical tensions, and suddenly silver isn't just scarce. It's strategic. The U.S. is waking up late to the fact that it no longer controls the raw materials behind its own energy transition, and that's driving more buyers into silver. Not just investors, but governments and industries hoarding it before the shortage hits a crisis point. This isn't speculation, it's a resource war, and silver is at the center of it.
Well, how are they going to know what I think? Well, you haven't seen the full power of AI just yet, right? They take all these different data points, hundreds of data points. They're vacuuming up on you. What are you doing when you're on Facebook? What are you watching when you're scrolling through the dumb YouTube thing? All that stuff is being collected and analyzed as we speak. So eventually, that's the system that they want. And there are very powerful forces within the Trump administration, someone with a long track record of donating to Democrats. I'm so tempted to name names, but I'll just leave it for now. Anybody should be able to figure these things out on their own if they look hard enough. But then there are people in the Trump administration who want to go back toward an honest monetary system. So I think we're headed toward a crisis, and I think the response to the crisis will determine which way we go. We can either move back toward a sound financial system, and there are encouraging things. You've talked about them on here, Dunnigan, the states that are now moving to make gold and silver into legal tender. I mean, there's encouraging things happening at the grassroots level, happening at the state level, even happening at the federal level. I've talked with people in Congress who are very, very interested in returning to the gold standard, and some of them have good relationships with the Trump administration. I've got an interview with Congressman Warren Davidson coming up in a couple days here about what we do with the Federal Reserve. So there is an appetite in Washington to move us in a better direction. But we've got all these very powerful people within the administration, within Congress, within the international institutions that want to move us toward basically a global digital version of what we had here with the Federal Reserve. So I think we're at a crossroads, Dunnigan, and I don't know which way we're going to go, but I hope everybody listening will take concrete steps to make sure we go down the right path rather than the wrong one.
While industrial demand soars and state-level rebellions gain momentum, investors are piling into silver at a pace we haven't seen in over a decade. In just the first half of 2025, global silver ETP inflows smashed through last year's totals, hitting 95 million ounces. Institutions that once ignored silver are now quietly accumulating, and retail buyers are rushing in as the price closes in on a 13-year high. With silver trading above $38 and up more than 31% year over year, it's no longer just catching up to gold, it's outpacing it. And this wave of interest is feeding on itself. As more investors see silver breaking out, more money pours in, driving prices higher and further tightening an already strained market. The 2025 deficit that is projected at 176 million ounces. That's not just tight, it's historic. With demand from solar, EVs, and investors all converging, there simply isn't enough physical silver to go around. And yet, Wall Street is still treating it like an industrial afterthought. But the smart money knows better. They're not waiting for the headlines. They're buying now because they understand that when silver moves, it doesn't walk. It runs. And this run isn't just another rally. It's the early stages of a full-blown silver bull market that could rewrite everything we know about precious metals.
And it works with the Trump administration, too. I've been very encouraged to see the Trump administration responding appropriately to heavy pressure from its support base. Not yet on the Epstein thing yet. We'll see where that goes. But on a lot of things, Trump has responded favorably. So the AI regulation, I think, is a very good example of that. As you mentioned, they wanted to prohibit any state regulation of artificial intelligence in exchange for basically, federal carrot. And the opposition was so enormous. And some of the people leading the opposition are great Americans. People like Reggie Littlejohn. These are great Americans leading the effort to expose the globalists, stop the global tyrannical agenda. So really, really happy to see that. And there are a lot of good signs on a lot of fronts. And I think there's a mistake that people make, Dunnigan. They kind of focus in on one thing and then they only look for information that confirms their bias. So the people who are in the Trump hating club, they only look for things that Trump has done wrong, and there are plenty of things he's done wrong, right? But they only look for those things, and they discount or they minimize any of the good things that are happening. And the same with Congress and some of the others. And then you have the other camp where it's, the kind of cultish, can do no wrong. We worship at the feet of this particular politician. And I think both of those are dangerous. We just need to make an honest assessment here. There are good things that are happening. There are encouraging signs happening. We see Americans waking up in huge numbers. We see millions of families fleeing from the public school system. We see people getting involved in politics. And then, of course, we see the downside that there's, unfortunately, the tyrannical forces that have led us to this situation we find ourselves in are still very active. They're still very powerful. A lot of people would have hoped that Trump would succeed in destroying them on day one. I think that's a little bit naive. But, we've got to look at this and make an honest assessment rather than just, the confirmation bias. We only look at stuff that confirms our pre-existing.
The system is cracking, and the $150 trillion lie that once held it together is now impossible to ignore. The middle class is being drained, the dollar is bleeding credibility, and the institutions tasked with preserving stability are frantically trying to patch holes in a sinking ship. But silver is surging, not because of hype, but because the math no longer works. With soaring industrial demand, a crumbling fiat foundation, and the rise of a monetary rebellion at both state and global levels, silver has transformed from a quiet hedge into a financial lifeboat. The window to prepare is closing fast. When the next shock hits, whether it's a CBDC rollout, a debt spiral, or a full-blown currency crisis, silver could explode past $1,000 as capital floods into anything real, scarce, and outside the system. That moment isn't decades away. It's already unfolding. If you can see the warning signs, don't wait. Get educated, get prepared, and stay ahead of the curve. Make sure to subscribe for more deep dives like this. And remember, this is not financial advice. Always speak to a professional before making any financial decisions.